James Dorsey is an award-winning scholar and journalist with a different perspective on the Middle East and a senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Singapore. James, thank you very much for your time and welcome to Sabah al-Muslim on Radio Islam International.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
The pleasure is ours. Let's look at the first story for the morning. This week's International Court of Justice proceedings against Israel has forced Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to publicly state for the first time that Israel has no intention of depopulating Gaza.
Indeed. So, as you know, South Africa has made a very strong case against Israel, saying that this war risks genocide, and Israel will be responding to that assertion later today. But one of the issues at hand, of course, is whether or not Israel is seeking to depopulate or ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip. And that, for the first time now, the Israeli Prime Minister has unequivocally said that is not the case. That leaves open, of course, a phrase that he has used in the past, which is voluntary migration. And there are reports that he is trying to persuade the Democratic Republic of Congo, among others, to accept Palestinians should they be willing to leave.
Let's look further onto the story. U.S. pressure on Israel to focus on precision strikes and targeted killings rather than indiscriminate bombing of the Gaza Strip potentially heightens the risk of the war escalating into a regional bust-up and expanding beyond the Middle East.
Well, what you've seen over the last week is a series of targeted killings, if you wish, by the Israelis, starting with Hamas official Saleh al-Aruri in Beirut, and including at least 6 Hezbollah operatives, including a senior commander in southern Lebanon, and the assassination of a senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander in Syria. The problem with that is that on the one hand, of course, it reduces the risk to civilian casualties, but it opens the door to a tit-for-tat that would play out not necessarily in Israel, Lebanon, or Gaza, but in fact across the world, and first and foremost, primarily, probably in Europe and the United States, because particularly Hamas doesn't have a lot of alternative options.
Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia keeps the door open to diplomatic relations with Israel and a role for Hamas in governing Gaza.
Indeed. So the notion is that the Gaza war has put the possibility of establishment of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel to bed. The Saudi ambassador in Britain has now said, and those words have been echoed by the Secretary of State in the United States, Antony Blinken, that the possibility of diplomatic relations remains on the table. However, that will have to be linked to a credible peace process that leads to a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Interestingly, the Saudi ambassador added, when asked about Hamas and whether Hamas would play a role in any future administration of Gaza, he said, he did not say outright no. He said that's something that has to be studied.
Mm-hmm. Now, last week's Islamic State bombing in Kerman that killed more than 80 people highlight multiple Iranian intelligence failures in preventing attacks on Iranian soil.
Indeed. So the attack in Kerman itself, the bombings were an intelligence failure. Iranian intelligence has not been able to prevent that. And by the same token, over the past several years, Israeli attacks, or what are believed to be Israeli attacks on senior nuclear-related Iranian officials, as well as on various critical infrastructure sites, are things that, again, the Iranian intelligence has not been able to prevent. So there is some discussion in Iran about, much like there is in Israel, about Israel's failure to prevent the Hamas attack on October 7. I think all of this is now complicated, of course, by the escalation of hostilities in the Red Sea, in which Iran is not directly involved, but it is with the Houthis in Yemen, for example, related to non-state allies of Iran.
James, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated on Radio Islam International.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.